Billy Bob Space Trucker.
Chapter 25. Mr. President, I want to be in on this meeting. Governor Dundee, every time we have a diplomatic meeting with the UHG, you glare at them and tell them they made a grave error kicking Australia out. That's because they did. We've been over this. They didn't want one of their member nations to be the country that waged a war on birds and lost. We didn't lose the Emu War. It was a tie. Not to mention virtually everything alive in your country is lethal to Xenos. How is that our fault? You've lost more politicians to wildlife than assassins. Just goes to show how tough we are. Your last prime minister, before we took you on as a state, invited the UHG officials to his home and wouldn't stop his pet croc from attacking them because he insisted they wrestle it. He only stopped it himself when the croc had torn one of their legs off. Your president had no trouble wrestling that croc. They just sent weak officials. Your people are loud. Your tourists are obnoxious. You've made an industry around showing off your super dangerous wildlife and fighting it for fun. You grill as much meat as possible, and your state seal features an outlaw fist fighting a shark and a croc at the same time. Ned Kelly, yeah. I know who he is, after all. You're Ned Dundee, and I'm sure that wasn't a mistake. President Cross set his hands on the governor's shoulders as he looked him in the eyes. Ned, face it, you belong with us Americans. We share so much in common. No one else on this planet wanted you, except us. We're in the middle of a war right now. I don't need you antagonizing the UHG with your insistence on wrestling them to prove they were wrong. The governor sighed. I just hate that they let those sheep shaggers next door in, but not us. Those sheep shaggers live on one of the nicest islands we've got. It's the fucking Shire, Ned. Screw 'em. We've got each other. Our two countries represent almost the entirety of the human military base. It's our job to make the Xenos hate us so the rest of humanity can play nice. Besides, you weren't the only ones disappointed with how those negotiations went down. Are you still mad about the Canadians? It was those weirdo Frenchy Canadians, and I know it. We'd totally have let them keep that Comni healthcare, but no way were we going to repeat everything in frog talk. He scowled for a moment and then looked back to Ned. But we have you now. You wrestle crocs, we wrestle gators. Come on, you know you're in the right country. I guess, could we make Ned Kelly Day a national holiday? Take it up with Congress. Maybe sell it as Badass Outlaw Day. We have a few outlaws of our own after all. Yeah, that might work. Here, I'll let you join me in the meeting, but be nice. No wrestling, okay? Okay. Promise? Promise. The president nodded at that, then adjusted his flag cloak and picked up his eagle standard as he carried it into the meeting room. Ned followed behind him, adjusting his hat lined with croc teeth and the giant knife tucked into his croc skin belt. The assembled UHG officials in their nice suits weren't surprised when the president slammed his standard into the ground, puncturing the floor so it would stand behind his seat. Then he sat down as Ned stood behind him, arms crossed, as he glared at the officials. What's this about? Cross asked first. You started a war with the rest of the galaxy and dragged us into it. His counterpart was Sophie Dorflinger. Once she was head of the Swiss bank, but had tried her hand at politics and somehow managed to find that perfect mesh of utterly ruthless yet maternal. Her hair was as gray as her suit, and her face was so perfectly neutral it looked like a statue. She played the varied and numerous special interest groups against one another and maintained a perfect balance in the UHG. Plus, she answered 90% of press conference questions with no comment. Correction, the rest of the galaxy decided to declare war on us and didn't bother to check facts. You devastated the core colony of the Galactic Secret Service species after they started killing and kidnapping your citizens unlawfully. We never asked you to intervene. You didn't need to. Your redneck criminal is harboring a terrorist and won't give her up. Our law-abiding citizen had a contract to guard a diplomat from being kidnapped and tortured. You've started an alliance with a species akin to space Nazis, from what I can tell. The Libertonians are not space Nazis. But while we're on the topic, the Geneva Art Museum has a wonderful exhibit on early 1900s art. Did you guys keep all the receipts for those? Have you tried opening diplomatic channels with the Crusticans? We don't negotiate with ass-faced crab terrorists. Why don't you send your pet psychopath away and we can discuss this like civilized people? Careful. I hear Ireland might secede and join us since you're all sticks in the mud who keep telling them not to drink so much. I might have even more uncivilized citizens soon. It's for their own good. Them and the Russians drink far too much. Picking on the Ruskies, too? Maybe they'll join us. He was quiet for a moment and then shook his head at the same time as Sophie. No, never mind, they'd never do it. But maybe we should discuss this one-on-one. She nodded and tilted her head to the door as the assembled UHG officials rose, taking their folders and notebooks. Ned looked down and the president nodded before he began to walk out as well. Soon they were alone in the large conference room. Just the president of the USA and the president of the UHG. She spoke first. Did your children get the gifts I sent? Oh yes, they're wonderful. Thank you again, it's always so thoughtful. Well, I figured someone has to buy them something cultural. Ha! And your grandkids? Oh, they love the toys you sent. Just can't get those things in Europe. They're so crass and obscene. I love it. And tell your wife we look forward to the next time she brings them over to visit. And same to your kids and grandkids. We had a blast. It's too bad we have to pretend not to interact, he shrugged. The nature of politics. He reached into his suit and pulled out a 1-pound package of uncut premium bacon, sliding it across the table to her. She smiled and pulled up her purse, pulling out a giant bar of Swiss chocolate and slid it to him as he said, You know, we could easily have lackeys do this for us. Oh, but it's so fun. We get to be spies, was her reply. He laughed at that and picked up the bar of chocolate as she dropped the package of bacon into her purse. Nice line about the art museum. I had a writer make up a list of quips for me, I won't lie. But seriously, the Irish aren't happy the central admin keeps turning down some petition. They want to make us designate a Fuck England Day, who in return want us to recognize St. Patrick's Day as Drunk Potato Day. The Japanese and the Chinese still won't let up about this or that. Greece still wants reparations from Germany for the invasion. Which one? Does it really matter? I guess not. We're a unified government, but everyone still hates each other. Now they just try to take it out through paperwork. How do you keep all the states in line? Sports? We promote certain rivalries, so specific areas concentrate their hatred against only certain other areas rather than everyone else. New York and New England, San Francisco and LA, Alabama and itself, same with Oregon. We were a little worried about Australia, but we've got a nice rivalry brewing between Sydney and Dallas, plus Melbourne and Miami. Not to mention they still rag on New Zealand about being full of sheep shaggers. Now about the war we're in. I know you don't have any regular communications with them, but you're aware of the council vote. Yeah, we're aware. The founders are ramping up, and the member nations are dragging their heels, but they're getting ready to join in. We're prepping to send a very large force to the Libertonian colony and home planet and then just turtle up. After that, we'll shut down the FTL gates in enemy space and start pushing our way out system by system. I'm fairly sure the member species won't be invading our colonies, but it's clear we can't directly support you. All right then, so the Spetsnaz and Mossad are suddenly full of American citizens? They're filling out the paperwork. Also, due to some miscommunication about tariffs, you're going to be receiving 5 super tanks of materials every week until we can get our production up. Also, we've reviewed our records and apparently we made a mistake. All uranium mines are actually on American territory. Our mistake. No harm done. What about your bases in the Centauri Abyss and the Mirian Traverse? She sighed out at that. We were so careful. How did you find out? He just stared at her and arched an eyebrow. Do you really need to spy on us that bad? He shrugged. We'll be giving the territory we gained to you, but I want to keep one planet to dedicate to our hero. Who's that? Our citizen you so rudely called a redneck, of course. No other than Billy Bob Space Trucker. The USS Predator was the newest Special Forces cruiser in the fleet. It had one of the latest skip drives and the best stealth technology there was. The Crabs had been the secret police so long they'd grown lazy, preferring to tell people to forget what they saw rather than avoid detection altogether. The cruiser had a smaller crew complement because of the space needed for the stealth tech and large skip drive, but they still had a full complement of 50 Archangels and no reduction to their offensive capabilities. Billy Bob was staring straight at it, and from less than 100 yards as it closed into dock, and he still had trouble seeing the damn thing against the darkness of space. Finally, there was the clang of the magnetic dock, and the airlock opened to let 10 new black power-suited commandos advance onto the Rosie. Is this really necessary? Billy Bob was asking as they stomped on board. Maybe they were just walking, but the magnets in their boots kept stomping down. Yes, we have to comb the ship for any bugs just in case before we torch it and leave, Crunch was saying as the new archangels filed past except the last one. Not bad, Fruity Pebbles. Glad to see you let the civvy take the lead on the rescue mission to get off the planet, said the so far nameless archangel. Before Crunch could reply, Billy Bob simply said, "Who the fuck are you, Admiral Snackbar? Get the fuck off my ship." The towering power suit turned to Billy Bob. "I'm Major Grenshaw. I outrank you, Lieutenant. This is my fucking ship. I'm flying it, and in charge of it, which makes it my ship. I don't remember giving you permission to board my ship. I let the others pass just fine because they're following orders. But you, I don't think I want you on my ship. Besides, you just called me a lieutenant, which I am, which means I'm not a civvy. Gotta mark you down for that one. You can't talk to a superior officer that way, Lieutenant." "I think I just fucking did. Now get off my ship. This ship was not assigned to you. There is no CO of this ship. You can't deny me permission to board. Well, then just fuck off in general." "You're speaking to an Archangel Lieutenant," the Major growled out. "I've been speaking to them. Some of them saved my life and the life of my friends, so you don't really scare me." Billy Bob stared up at the figure before him, knowing the commando inside could no doubt mop the floor with his face outside the suit. But that wasn't really the point. "You have no authority over me, Lieutenant." The figure moved forward, and Billy Bob had to jump aside to avoid being knocked down by him. Then Billy Bob smiled at Crunch. "Want to show me to your CO?" They boarded the Predator then, nodding at the extra archangels waited inside the airlock. "Expecting this to be a Xeno trap, were you?" Billy Bob asked one of the black faceplates. "Never can be too careful, sir." Billy Bob shrugged as Crunch led him through the square hallways designed to easily accommodate the power suits. The bridge was at the center of the upper deck of the ship, which took them a good 5 minutes to walk to. Billy Bob had forgotten what it was like on these giant ships. He missed his Longhorn. Soon enough, they were passing by 2 more archangels guarding the bridge, and he was suddenly among normal humans again. Humans in uniforms, but humans even so. He looked around as the various officers and staff on the bridge looked his way. The bridge was arrayed in a general T with the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator up at the junction, and the rest arranged the main line. There was a command chair at the end of the line to Billy Bob's right, but he didn't see anyone sitting in it. "Right, who's the captain?" One of the figures in blue turned around to face him then. A woman he'd guessed to be in her late 40s or early 50s, blue eyes, black and white hair. She didn't seem to believe in coloring it. "I'm the captain here." "You're the VIP?" "Yes, about that. I want a promotion." The woman frowned at that, tilting her head a little as she looked at him. "Is that right, Lieutenant?" "Yes. I'm well aware that this is probably my one and only chance to leverage the brass to do anything I want, so I'm going for it." "And why do you want to be promoted?" "Same reason as anyone else. More power, more money. I'm sure you've got a direct FTL line to someone who can promote me." "I assure you, Lieutenant, I won't be promoting anyone so they can commandeer my vessel." Billy Bob shook his head at that. No, you misunderstand. I'm a pilot. That makes me Space Force, really, not Navy per se." The captain sighed and shook her head. "I always wish we'd come up for a better name for that." "And what would you achieve being a higher-ranking Space Force officer?" "I don't have any small craft on this ship. Just Navy and Archangels. Bingo. And thanks to the rules of Officer Division, I can't boss around Navy officers since the well-being of the ship comes first. But I can—" He pointed at her with a smile as he let her complete the thought. "You can give orders to ground forces." She looked a little confused. "Ah, there we go. Which means that while in the course of my mission I'm in need of proceeding on my own, I get to tell the ground forces assigned to protect me to—" He pointed at her again as she thought that one over. "Fuck off," she ventured. "Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner." He smiled at her as she just looked a bit more confused. "Let me get this straight. You want to be promoted so that you can tell your bodyguards to stop? Yeah. I know where this is going. I'm a VIP, I'm important, they want me to survive, blah, blah, blah. I'm not worth risking archangels on. These Xenos are rather bad at killing me. Aside from the museum, but that was a trap. Why waste a whole cruiser on me? So you want me to contact the brass and have them promote you just so you can make sure the brass doesn't get to baby you with commandos who you think could be put to better use. You got it in one, he said with a smile. And what makes you think they don't just demote you instead? I'm friends with the Libertonian diplomat. Ah, yes. The birds. Space Eagle raptors. Their forehands end in super sharp claws. Do they? Maybe they'll be more useful than I thought. She thought it over and then shrugged. I guess I'll talk to the brass. I'm coming with you, he said. They walked to the back of the bridge as she punched in a code on a door and waved him into the room beyond. There was a comms room with 2 techs hunched over terminals and a large screen at the back. Get the brass on the line, the captain said simply as one of the techs typed on his terminal. Then the screen in front of them began to show a video of some old big band playing a song. The hell is this? I think that's the brass section, Billy Bob pointed out. They looked over at the tech, who smiled. Sorry, sir, you didn't specify which brass, so I figured to just bring up a whole section. The captain reached over and smacked the side of his head as he laughed. Goddamn smartass. The tech kept typing, and then they saw a screen with another tech on it, looking up at them. Central. This is Commodore Verne of the Predator. Who's awake right now? Billy Bob looked over and noted she was the equivalent of a colonel for ground forces. The term captain in the Navy now just meant ship CO, while the old rank had been replaced with Commodore in an attempt to make it less confusing. It hadn't worked. Now it was just confusing in a different way when you needed to appoint a Commodore to a ship squadron. Vice Admiral Tethers and Major General Brewster are both awake. Patch me through, please. The tech nodded and tapped at his console on the screen. The screen went blue, and after about a minute, half of it came up with a skinny-looking man in a white uniform. He had a gaunt look about him. Vice Admiral Tethers speaking. This is Commodore Verne. We're waiting on Major General Brewster, sir. The Admiral nodded and waited until the other half the screen filled in with the image of a barrel-chested man in a green uniform shaving with a Bowie knife. What do you want? Ah, this is Commodore Verne. I have the VIP for my mission here. He wants a promotion. The general stopped shaving and looked over while the Admiral frowned. Come again, Commodore? Tethers said as Billy Bob stepped forward. I want you to make me a colonel. That way I can order your archangels to stop following me around and get back to the war. You're an important individual, Lieutenant. The Admiral began to shuffle through the data slates on his desk. Just call me Billy Bob. Look, I know you guys want me to stay on this ship all safe and sound, but you're going about it wrong. You don't need to have a full cruiser and 50 archangels protecting 2 people. There's no way this will get to the capital anyway. What you need is to have this ship helping the war, assassinating Xenos and fucking shit up. Think you know more than us, do you? The general asked, his face half covered in shaving cream. I think you just didn't think about it. You figured send some commandos to babysit me. I got this far, didn't I? Do you really think a single cruiser, even one this nice, would get past everything they got and get me to the capital undetected? You both know I need the CIA, not the military at this point. Was that got to do with this? The general asked. Make me a colonel so I can firmly tell your archangels to fuck off and get back to killing. I take my ship to a local black market station and wait for the spooks to show up. You get your cruiser back to the war. In a week or so, I show up on the capital and the Libertonian does whatever she needs to. I become the CIA's problem. The general shrugged at that. Sure. General Brewster, we need to discuss this more carefully, Tethers urged. Nah. Make him a colonel already. Commodore, you tell me angels to get back to killing. The general tapped on a console in front of him, and there was a ping on the terminal behind Billy Bob. Then the screen went dark. The Admiral shook his head and tapped on his own console before his side of the screen went dark too. Billy Bob blinked. Was that all it took? The Commodore shrugged. There's a war on, Colonel. They'd rather have a cruiser and commandos than a political pawn. Billy Bob laughed and turned to look at the terminal behind him. It had a small 3D printer which was spitting out rank tabs. He picked them up and slapped them onto the collar of his plaid shirt. All right, well, it's been nice, Commodore, but I'm heading back to my ship, he said and gave her a salute. She returned it with a smirk. He walked back out and nodded at Crunch. I'd shake your hand, but you'd crush mine. It's been nice, Crunch. Thanks for saving my ass. I owe you some drinks once this is all over. He gave her another salute, which she returned. Come find me. I'll buy a few for you, too. He grinned and then quickly began to jog back down the way they'd come from. He wanted to be off the ship as soon as possible. He didn't mind military service for obvious reasons, but the sooner he got this moving, the sooner he'd be back to his Longhorn with Emily, and he didn't have to worry about the brass changing their minds. He passed the archangels guarding the boarding tube and quickly walked back across to the Rosie. Looking around, he found one of the archangels still scanning the ship with a handheld sensor. "You there, Sergeant something. Where's Admiral Snackbar?" "Who?" He saw the new tabs on Billy Bob's shirt. Sir?" "Major Cockface, whatever his name is." "Oh, Major Cockface is on the bridge, sir." Billy Bob nodded and quickly jogged through the Atlas and up to the bridge. He saw a figure in a power suit arguing with Emily over something and didn't even need to ask to know that was his man. "Hey, Admiral Snackbar!" The figure spun around. "What?" Billy Bob pointed to the tabs on his shirt. "Get the fuck off my ship!" And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker. Chapter 26. Grand Superintendent Milner stood on the bridge of the Greslin Dreadnought Council's Pride. Water was too heavy and too unwieldy for them to fill a ship with it, despite being an aquatic species, but they had massive pools spread throughout the ship for downtime and getting out of their exosuits. For this reason, they'd always built strong ships, and since they were the Council's main police force, it made sense they'd have the bulk of the main fleet. The Crusticans were bogged down on their home system since they shared it with the Libertonians and their ongoing invasion of Bastion, so the invasion into human space fell to his kind. The humans had just sent a large fleet into the Libertonian territory, and from what they could tell, that meant most of their fleet was on the offensive, or rather a forward defensive of someone else's territory. They'd soon learn the error of sparking a war with the Council. The fleet was on the edge of human space. The FTL lanes ran through a brutal system they called Gemini, some sort of two-headed creature from their lore. The system itself had two stars spinning around one another, and he had no idea how they colonized a planet tossed between such extreme seasons, but they had no plans for a land invasion. They'd brush aside orbital defenses, bomb the planet for a while, and move on to actual human colonies with land the Council could use. They were just one system out from Gemini in a dead system called TR-231. There were some dead planets and an asteroid belt, but the material resources were minimal enough to make mining operations not cost-effective. The fleet was approaching the asteroid belt when suddenly the FTL field flickered and stopped. The ships groaned a bit, slowing down as the lanes vanished around them. Milner looked around at his crew. "Report!" We're seeing total FTL gate failure across this sector, sir." "Impossible. There weren't any humans behind us. They couldn't have destroyed the gates." Readings indicate the gates are intact. They just stopped." "That's not possible. Only the Council can control the gates. Fleet status?" "All ships reporting in." "No damage, sir. Should we take defensive positions?" "Any civilian traffic?" "No, since the declaration of war, the space lanes into human space have been empty. We're in a dead system. The humans aren't supposed to have much of a fleet left. They're just trying to slow us down. Send out maintenance crews to the nearest gates. Get them operational again." "What about an ambush, sir?" "What did I just say? They don't have more ships. Get them out there. I don't even know how long it would take to reach human space without those gates. The average ship could travel at 10,000 miles an hour. Fast, but nowhere near FTL fast. There are some minor readings in the asteroid, sir." "Minor? How minor?" "Maybe some small shelters, sir? No engines detected." "Bah, ignore it. Just some old survey stations before they realized the system wasn't interesting, most likely." What they didn't know was that they were being watched from those asteroids. Rear Admiral Wayne was leaning over the shoulder of one of his tech to read the console. They were running dark at the moment, his defense station hidden among the rocks. "They're just sitting there?" "Yes, sir. Looks like they're sending out a maintenance team to one of the gates. Fat lot of good it'll do them. No defensive screen? Nothing? Just travel formation?" "Yes, sir, we have a clean shot on their forward dreadnoughts. The flagship is currently screened by another dreadnought." "All right, we'll blow that one up and then get the flagship. That's our primary objective." "Yes, sir." The Lucifer's Hammer was the latest American military station, built in secret and towed to the asteroid field. It housed no less than 8 nuclear reactors, all of which went to powering the main gun. They hadn't figured out how to make a Death Star yet, but this wasn't bad. It could fire a chunk of special alloy 20 feet in diameter at 10,000 miles a second. That was about 5% of the speed of light, which was more impressive than it sounded. especially when you see that it's 10,000 miles. Every single second. It was the largest, most powerful gun America had ever made, and they were already trying to make something bigger and more powerful. Since the greater galaxy had the ability to move ships around through FTL gates for centuries, and they fought around important junctions while seeking to protect infrastructure and colonies, they had no desire to develop any such weapon. If they missed a shot, the possible collateral damage was beyond compare. But humans, and especially Americans, fought on their own rules. With their ability to sabotage the gates and their ability to live out in empty stretches of space, they had the perfect opportunity. Back on the flagship, Grand Principal Mjolnir was grumbling and cursing as he paced back and forth on the bridge. The ships had reported in and were holding position. The dreadnought Thyron's Fury just ahead of them was holding position. The principal in charge was a veteran, and the ship itself was top of the line, though not as good as the flagship. It had armor 3 feet thick at its strongest, a crew complement of 15,000, including soldiers, some of the strongest guns in the galaxy, and had been tested in battle 23 times. "Sir, I'm detecting a sudden energy buildup in the asteroids." "Is it an engine?" I don't know. I'm not detecting an engine signature, but I'm seeing an energy spike on par with our entire flagship and 2 other dreadnoughts." Something in the field blinked, and suddenly the Thyron's Fury was splitting apart. "What happened?" the Grand Principal exclaimed. "What just happened?" Their rector is going critical, sir." They watched in horror as the dreadnought began to rupture and split, chunks of it exploding as the ship died. The oxygen was vented out immediately, and since they hadn't been at battle stations, none of the bulkheads had been in place before they were hit. The pieces of metal began to drift away from the center where the reactor had exploded, smaller systems rupturing as energy cells went critical, bodies floating in space. The water from their relaxation pools freezing and splintering in the vacuum. "Sir?" "Hard evasive maneuvers. Start firing into the asteroid field." "We don't have a lock on any coordinates, sir." "Just open fire! Any rock, all of them. Start shooting back." The ships started to spin their engines back up, moving in a hurry now. "Look at that. Isn't it cute?" "They're trying to take evasive maneuvers," Rear Admiral Wayne said as he watched the enemy fleet finally start to move. They had to wait to the gun to charge back up before they could fire again, but there wasn't a chance in hell that Dreadnought could avoid a bullet traveling at 10,000 miles a second. The fire from the fleet began to slam into the asteroids. It was mostly energy bolts and a few missiles, plus much larger versions of what they called matter slammers. The rocks before them started to shudder and split under the fire, but they weren't focused. They were just cracking open the first layer of rocks they could aim at. The humans were beyond that, waiting for the right moment. A few squadrons of fighter bombers were holding back until they had the signal to attack. Wayne knew they were severely outnumbered, even if the platform could wipe out their dreadnoughts in a single shot. Once the Xenos figured out their location, it was only a matter of time before they'd be destroyed. But the point wasn't to survive. It was to kick them in the nuts as hard as possible. He didn't really have time to give everyone a big speech, especially since the battle had already started. So instead, he just gave everyone the green. Railguns began to spit superheated metal at the Xenos. The fighter bombers started to pour out of the rocks and swarm over the closest capital ships. Special Space Marine boarding craft launched from the rocks, slamming into the smaller Xeno ships. The battle had truly begun as the Xenos tried to get into a better formation while the humans shot at them from defensive platforms on the rocks. The Lucifer's hammer might be destroyed soon, but they hadn't found their position yet, so they took aim as the capacitors were finally ready. Wayne opened a channel to all the humans in the area. "Well, I'm about to blow up their nicest ship, boys. When we all get to hell, you have direct orders to start taking over. We've already stolen the Devil's hammer. We might as well start taking his land, too." He grinned as he looked out at the Xeno fleet. Their flagship was dead to rights, the Council's largest, most powerful ship. They'd bragged it could take a broadside from any dreadnought ever made and shrug it off. Well, that might be true, but the humans hadn't made a dreadnought. "Oh, and while you sorry shits are taking over hell, start making a statue dedicated to the fine American who started a war with the rest of the galaxy." He pushed the button to fire as he said, "This one's for you, Billy Bob Space Trucker." 365 degrees, burning down the house. Billy Bob was drumming as hard as he could on the invisible drums in front of him as Emily shook her head. Why is he burning down the house again? Is it diseased or something? And couldn't they just clean it? Emily, you should know this by now. Most human music is not literal. It's full of metaphors and analogies and bullshit. We're generally just singing about fucking or getting fucked up. And then some sports songs and war songs for good measure. Although one could argue that the war songs fall under getting fucked up. What about those blues songs? Well, generally they're about fucking or being sad they haven't fucked in a while or not fucking a specific person. Occasionally they're sad about other things. I mean, I was just using some generalizations. But there are a lot of songs about metaphors focused on the themes I mentioned. There are, of course, literal songs, but they aren't very common. Although there's a good song about changing the name of a city. Once Billy Bob had laid claim to the Rosie again and gotten the Archangels off of it, the USS Predator had gone into attack mode. They attacked and destroyed a Crustacan ship, making a show of bombarding a tracking station on the planet, and then skipped off as the Council species tried to figure out what had happened. Getting Archangels onto planets wasn't hard. Getting them off was the trouble. So instead of taking the fight to the surface, they began to raid shipyards and orbital platforms. They all knew this wasn't going to be a quick war, so delaying production of new ships for a few months was more than worth it. Since the Archangels were doing their best to ruin the Xeno infrastructure, the news had forgotten about Billy Bob and Emily. He had no doubt that the crabs were still looking for them, but they probably thought they were on the cruiser that had been running amok. So Billy Bob had the Rosie docked at a black market space goblin station, and they had rented out a room for a galactic week while they waited for the CIA to show up. He'd make sure to crank up the gravity in the Rosie twice a day and play around with Stomper so his muscles didn't atrophy or anything like that. Plus, he had fun playing around with the Space Fox horse. It hadn't grown too much since they got it, but he was still excited for the day he could ride it into battle, although against what he had no idea. So they'd spent 3 days so far, hanging out in the room listening to music or going to one of the station's restaurants or just wandering around for the hell of it. He'd quickly become popular as a chef, teaching them how to properly cook human food for maximum enjoyment. Their supplies were limited now that the war had cut off the supply, or at least made it harder to get. Yet human food went a long way for most Xenos. Humans were incredibly dense after all, so what would be a tiny portion to a human was a feast for a Xeno. The few omnivores and carnivores that were civilized paid very well to get the incredible treats humans enjoyed. Billy Bob had been learning more about Xenos in the last few days. Without constantly driving around and knowing he needed to recover from getting the shit kicked out of him, he had nothing much else to do. For example, he'd learned the space goblins had been scavengers on their home planet and had just started to explore the greater galaxy when the regulation war was in full force. As such, they were the only non-council species allowed to trade in uninhabited sectors that were within council space. It had been a quick fix to allow them to start trading while the fate of the galactic government was being decided. The council founders had figured they'd join up once the war was over. But instead, the goblins had figured if the founders settled political disputes that way, they'd just remain neutral. And too many member species had started setting up trade with them for it to make sense to shut them down. So for the last few hundred years, they'd been living in a gray area of the law, founding stations outside of the directly regulated and monitored sectors of the council in order to trade freely. The council wasn't thrilled, but it served a purpose in letting carnivores and omnivores get meat while keeping the hands of the council clean. Aside from the Crusticans, of course. But the law was different when you were the secret police. Also, he found out there were a ton of different ways species slept when they'd checked out the room and had to figure out what kind of bed to order. The space goblins, for example, slept in these padded chambers in groups. The Borks would sleep more or less sitting up so their horns didn't gouge anything, but arranged in a circle so they could keep their eyes on everyone else. The space ants the goblins used as guards had to sleep in complete darkness, with something covering them and joined by no less than 2, and no greater than 4 other space ants. Apparently, humans had incredibly simple sleeping needs compared to most of the galaxy. Same with the Libertonians. He did discover that their beds weren't flat like humans, but they had a sort of padded bowl, so when they slept in it, their wings could fit better and extend around their shoulders like a cloak. He'd been trying to keep a mental list of eagle things and raptor things when dealing with her. The appearance he just considered a tie. The pointed beak was more like a dinosaur, same with the talons and claws and stuff. But wings and mostly feathers. Bird. The sleeping thing was totally a nest, so bird. But she shredded and ate meat like a... Well, eagles also ate meat. It was confusing. She finally took off the survival suit on the second day to get it mended and cleaned, which was when he discovered what her downy coloring was besides her white hair. Feathers. Head feathers? Shit. Billy Bob was struggling to figure out the terms in his head still. Either way, her head was white, and that ran down to around her shoulders before it turned black, and then she had blood red just along her forearms. She'd changed into what he could only describe as a loose gray vest with 70s bell-bottoms with Birkenstocks. She explained that their claws cut up many surfaces, so they wore special shoes to prevent that. At least she didn't wear socks. He never would have forgiven her. Although the older he got, the more comfy socks and Birkenstocks sounded. With the bell-bottoms, he didn't see what the coloring on her legs was like. He'd been avoiding any discussion about her anatomy like the plague, however, since he had no idea how to approach it. Her chest was sort of arranged like he figured fit for a female, but she had a tuft of feathers around where he expected cleavage to start, so what was beneath the vest was still a mystery. Was she even a mammal? She wasn't cold-blooded, he knew. Without the cloak of the suit to hide under, he also discovered she had a small tail. Fin? Was it just called a tail on a bird? Raptor. Fuck, he was confused. When she'd caught him looking, she'd mentioned it was for stabilization, and he'd quickly changed the subject. He knew that she liked him. Aside from trying to cut his throat that one time, she did like to rest against him while they listened to music. That, and he caught her staring at him when she was awake during his own sleep cycle. He did like her bright purplish-pink eyes, though. That was cool. Sometimes she'd lean against him while they waited for food. She'd even go so far as to rub her cheek to his in public. But she mentioned it was strange for her to have to bend down to do so, which made him even more aware of the strange sensation that she was taller than him. Billy Bob just didn't know what to do. He wasn't a diplomat. He'd never really considered paying attention to Xenos in this sort of way until everyone told him he damn well better. Whenever he did hear something about her species and affection, it always sounded like a surefire way to get torn to shreds for a human. He was much stronger than her, but his skin wasn't exactly protected from being torn to shreds by super-sharp Space Eagle raptor talons. Did he dare even approach the topic? He'd been all but told that his country demanded it of him for the war effort. That was a whole mess of pressure he had never, ever expected to have applied to him. Maybe he should look up more about Libertonians? But what if she looked at his extranet history and saw him looking up Libertonians doing it? If it weren't for all the alcohol he'd been drinking, he was confident he'd be super stressed out. He was trying to explain to her some of the enigma that was the talking heads when they both were startled by the sound of the room's comm screen beeping at them. He quickly turned the music off and turned it on. Yes? He was looking at a rather attractive woman with blonde hair and emerald eyes and some sort of sparkling green dress that matched her eyes. She smiled at him, flashing her white teeth. Colonel Billy Bob? Never expected to hear that, but yes. Who are you? Who else is looking for you this far into council space on a black market station while you shack up with a space bird? Eagle Raptor. The woman looked confused for a second as he shook his head. Never mind. Right, you're the CIA. Of course. Well, what do we do from here? Some sort of secret meeting? We're in what can be considered friendly territory. Just meet me in the bar downstairs. I'd like to get a drink with you and talk things over. She smiled again as the feed went dead. He turned and then jerked in surprise as he found Emily standing literally right behind him. Blah. Who was that? You heard the call. That's the girl from the human intelligence outfit. Why was she dressed like that? It's a dress? Human women wear them to look attractive? Had he missed something? The trucker was confused. She turned as she moved towards the exit. She had gotten her survival suit and cloak back, but hadn't put them on yet. She was still in that oddly retro outfit. Let us go speak with her so I can set the record straight. What? Billy Bob was lost. If there was such a thing as a translator to translate female to him, then he'd gladly pay at least one of the 10 billion credits he was going to get for it. He followed after her, grabbing a jacket on his way out so he didn't look quite so redneckish in his usual plaid shirt. But as he went to grab his jacket, he saw Emily's gloves had been dropped to the floor. That meant she was going out with her talons bared. He didn't understand why, so he quickly pulled the jacket on and moved to catch up with her. She was walking very briskly as she was already down the stairs in the hotel's bar when he found her. Then he saw the human woman with that sparkling bright green dress. She saw him and started to walk forward with a smile, one leg visible up to mid-thigh through a slit in her dress. She extended her hand. "Billy Bob?" But before he could approach, Emily stepped between them. He was even more confused than earlier when he saw her wings spread out wide, as if she was taking up as much space as possible. Billy Bob couldn't even see the woman past her. But suddenly her white wings shifted as he saw bright red feathers bared beneath the normal white ones. What was going on? Hello? He couldn't see what was going on, but the woman was looking up at Emily, towering over her, wings flared, talons extended out. The gossamer dragonfly-like wings in between her upper and lower arms shimmering in the light. Emily didn't respond. She just advanced slowly, one step at a time, as the human backed up. When the CIA agent tried to step to the side, Emily snapped at her and quickly stepped to block her. "What is she doing?" she said, as now the whole bar was watching. "I have no idea," Billy Bob called out from the other side. Emily just let out a menacing raptor-like screech and advanced quickly as the woman squealed and backed up. Emily? Emily, what are you doing?" he said while following behind the Libertonian. "Why is she doing this?" "I have no idea." "Stop her." "I don't know how." Emily advanced again, and the woman shrieked as she was slapped with those big wings until she turned and ran out of the bar. Once she had done that, Emily turned to Billy Bob, who saw even more of those bright red feathers bared beneath the white ones now. She flapped her wings at him, and he backed up a ways. Then she turned, startling the patrons as she dashed forward, stealing a bottle of alcohol from the bar and 2 plates of food from nervous space goblins. She quickly handed them to Billy Bob, basically shoving them in his face until he grabbed them all, rather awkwardly since he only had 2 hands. Once he had done that, she lowered her wings, standing to Billy Bob's left as he felt one wing on his back and the other his front. She stared back at the confused human woman and called out, "Clearly I'm the better provider. Not to mention my natural bright coloring is much more impressive, even with your cheap color enhancement. He's obviously chosen his mate." Billy Bob nearly dropped everything in his hands then and there. "What?" was all he could gasp out. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker.